They didn't wait for a signal. They didn't ask for permission. One moved behind me, his presence radiating a heat that soaked right through my thin robe, his hand finding the curve of my waist with a familiarity that should have terrified me. The other stood directly in front, locking his eyes on mine, a silent challenge daring me to run, or to finally stand my ground. The utility room was dim, lit only by the dying bulb overhead and the rhythmic, hypnotic thrum of the dryer. The air smelled of clean linen and rain-soaked wool. 4 hands settled on me. I didn't push them away. I didn't speak. I simply leaned back against the vibrating warmth of the machine and let the tension in the room tighten until it felt like a physical weight. I let them take the lead, moving with a careful precision that suggested they had been planning this moment for a lifetime. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? And maybe they had. I had convinced myself that I didn't know what want felt like anymore. I told myself that part of me had atrophied. I had buried it under piles of folded laundry. I buried it during silent dinners where the clinking of silverware was the only conversation. I buried it every time I started a new load of wash just to avoid the cold, cavernous silence of the master bedroom upstairs. I never planned for this. I never fantasized about 2 pairs of hands treating me like a revelation, but when they reached for me, I didn't flinch. I opened a door I had welded shut years ago. It didn't feel like a transgression. It felt like a resurrection. I am 38. I have been a wife for 12 years. I am the woman who remembers the birthdays, the allergies, the dry cleaning schedules. I am the invisible engine that keeps the house running. But no one had truly looked at me, seen the woman beneath the routine in so long. The first man, Elias, is my husband's younger cousin. He's divorced, kind, and possesses a quiet gentleness that usually goes unnoticed. He's been around more often lately, fixing our gutters, checking the furnace, lingering when the work was done. The second is Silas. He's Elias's oldest friend. He's different, sharper, quieter, with a gaze that strips away pretenses. He asks questions with his eyes that I was too afraid to answer out loud. They started arriving together. At first, it seemed accidental. Then, it became a pattern. Then, it became a lifeline. They never looked at me like I was furniture. They looked at me like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. That specific night, the storm had torn down the power lines. My husband was stranded in another city on business. Another delayed flight, another vague text message. I was in the utility room, sorting towels by the light of a flashlight. When the knocking started, I wasn't expecting them. They stood on the porch, drenched to the bone, staring at me in my robe like they were seeing a ghost come to life. I don't remember who stepped in first. I only know that I didn't stop them. The dryer cycle ended, the room fell into a heavy silence broken only by my own ragged breathing and the soft sound of fabric shifting. I was trembling, not from fear, but from the shock of being touched with intent. This changes nothing. I whispered to the dark, a weak lie to protect myself. Silas pressed his forehead against mine. Elias loosened the sash of my robe with the reverence of a man unearthing a treasure. They weren't rushing. There was no competition between them. They moved in sync, a shared understanding that I was the center of their gravity. And then, the sound of the front door unlocking sliced through the air. I froze. Silas stepped back instantly. Elias moved away, grabbing a toolbox as if his hands hadn't just been on my skin. The silence that followed wasn't intimate. It was terrified. The light flickered and died completely. I stood in the dark, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My husband didn't come in immediately. I heard his heavy footsteps, the rattle of his keys, the slow creak of the door. By the time he entered, I had retied my robe and leaned against the washer, feigning normalcy. Silas had vanished down the hall. Elias was kneeling by the breaker box, talking too loudly about fuses. My husband walked in, shaking off his umbrella. He kissed my cheek, a cold, perfunctory peck, and asked about the power. I smiled, a tight, brittle thing, and said I didn't know. And just like that, the surface of the water smoothed over. The next morning was indistinguishable from the last 10 years. Coffee, toast. The silence of a radio host chatting about traffic. My husband left for work without looking back. But I was still vibrating. I could feel the phantom pressure of their hands. It wasn't guilt. It was the feeling of waking up after a decade-long coma. It didn't stop there. It started small. Silas would drop off a package and stand too close in the foyer. Elias would come to fix a cabinet and stay for coffee, his knee brushing mine under the table. They filled the voids my husband left behind. I'm not saying this with malice. It's just the truth. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being married to someone who has forgotten you exist. I had a home, security, a ring, but I was starving. The shift became undeniable during a grocery run. Elias insisted on carrying the bags. Silas followed. We stood in the kitchen, the bags on the counter, the air thick with unspoken things. Silas broke the silence. You do everything alone, he said, his voice low. Most days, I admitted. You don't have to, Elias added. They didn't leave, they stayed. And for the next few weeks, the visits became frequent. The touches became bolder. A hand on the small of my back as I washed dishes. A body blocking my exit in the pantry, forcing me to squeeze past, chest to chest. One rainy Thursday, my husband was gone again. We ended up in the garage, sitting on crates, listening to the rain hammer the roof. Do you think you could disappear? Silas asked suddenly. He wouldn't even know you were gone. The question hung in the air. Elias reached out and covered my hand with his. I didn't pull away. That was the night I realized I wasn't the only one holding my breath. It escalated. They knew my schedule better than my husband did. They knew when I was lonely. One afternoon, Silas cornered me in the pantry. He didn't touch me, but he boxed me in, his arm resting on the shelf by my head. You're allowed to want things, he murmured. Not everything, I said, my voice shaking. Yes, he countered. Everything. Then came the storm. The real one. My husband texted stuck at the airport. Sleep tight. An hour later, Elias and Silas were at my door with flashlights and water. We sat in the dark living room as the wind howled. We stopped talking. The air became electric. Elias stood up and offered me a hand. I took it. Silas stood behind me. We moved to the utility room, the warmest place in the house. And that's when it happened. The moment I described at the start. The moment the dam broke. They didn't just touch me, they worshipped me. Elias's hands were an anchor, Silas's kiss was a storm. I wasn't a wife or a housekeeper. I was a woman. I was desired. We stayed there, entangled in the dark, while the world outside fell apart. For a few hours, I didn't belong to a routine. I belonged to myself and to them. The next morning, the sun was cruel. It exposed everything. I washed a coffee mug until my knuckles turned white. Elias and Silas had left before dawn, ghosting out the side door. My husband returned that evening with takeout and a story about his flight. He didn't notice the change in me. He didn't notice that I was vibrating with a new frequency. He ate his sandwich, watched the news, and went to bed. I lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the cold distance between us. It wasn't just a gap anymore, it was a canyon. The days that followed were agonizing. Elias and Silas kept their distance, but the energy was there, humming beneath the floorboards. I found a jacket one of them had left behind. I buried my face in it, inhaling the scent of rain and musk, before hiding it away. I realized then that I couldn't go back. You can't unknow what it feels like to be alive. It came to a head on a Tuesday. I returned from the store to hear voices in the backyard. I crept to the kitchen window. There they were, Elias and Silas, standing by the fence. They weren't working. They were talking, heads bent close together, conspiring. Elias looked agitated. Silas looked determined. Then, Silas looked up. He saw me through the glass. He didn't look away. He didn't smile. He held my gaze with a terrifying intensity. Elias turned and saw me too. He stopped talking. My husband was upstairs, asleep on the couch on his day off. Oblivious to the world burning down in his own backyard, Silas took a step toward the house. Then another. Elias followed. My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't a game anymore. This wasn't a secret stolen in the dark. They were coming to the door. I looked at the stairs leading to the bedroom where my empty marriage lay sleeping. Then I looked at the back door, where two men were walking toward me with a purpose that could destroy everything I had built. I didn't lock the door. I reached out, turned the handle, and pushed it open. The wind blew in, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of something dangerous. I stepped out onto the porch to meet them. I was done waiting for permission. I was done being safe. I'm here, I said, my voice steady for the first time in years. Silas stopped at the bottom of the steps, his eyes dark and hungry. We know, he said. We're not leaving. Good, I whispered, and as the screen door slammed shut behind me, sealing my old life inside, I finally took my first real breath.